This episode is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Become a patron today at patreon.com/into the portal. It was said that life at sea was no place for a lady. However, this was hardly the way to describe Anne Bonny and Mary Read, two fearless female pirates that lived during the golden age of Caribbean piracy of the 1700s. What brief record does exist of the lives of Anne Bonny and Mary Read is filled with enough notorious deeds to qualify both women for a place of honor beside the likes of Blackbeard and other well-known male pirates. Armed with the confidence of her machete and her trusted pistol, loaded as always, Bonny took the first swing at the invading pirate hunters, gritting her teeth and daring them to come closer as she spat in a slew of ruddy faces charging across the deck, swarming the ship whose belly was filled with the 12 cowardly souls of her former crewmates. The Revenge had been followed through the Caribbean waters for weeks, chased by British hired mercenaries, and it was all finally coming to a head that fateful day in 1720. Alongside Bonny, Mary Read brandished her deadly cutlass and charged across the deck into the steady stream of soldiers sent to capture the Calico's motley band of pirates. Though the two women alone put up a vicious fight, using everything at their disposal to evade capture, while the rest of their shipmates hid below the decks. In the end, Bonny and Read were greatly outnumbered, and arrested to be put on trial along with the rest of Rackham's crew. But how exactly did these two women wind up where they did that fateful afternoon in 1720? Tonight, we take you on a whole new adventure, filled with reckless racketeering pirates and swashbuckling savvy sea women, only on Into the Portal.
Hello, and welcome back into the portal. I'm Amber A.
And I'm Andrew McKay.
And we're coming at you with episode 16.
Is it 16?
Or no, it's 17.
Oh my gosh.
Oops. I think it's 17.
16 or 17, something like that.
I always
it's
get
crazy.
lost with the Roman numerals.
Time flies, right?
It does.
It's
and
crazy.
I am really, really excited about this week's episode.
Yeah, you've been talking about it a lot.
It's kind of out of left field for us, but it does have a good mix of history and a little bit of legendary status people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And we are talking about the true Pirates of the Caribbean.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think our main focus tonight is on two lovely ladies, if you want to call them that.
Yeah, I'm sure lots of people wouldn't have referred to them that way.
Nope, but we are going to keep it classy.
Yeah. So we're focusing on Anne Bonny and Mary Read,
Yes.
two infamous pirates that have a sort of convoluted background, and there's a lot of potential misinformation about them, and it's sort of ambiguous, the ending.
Yes.
And
They're definitely more legend than fact.
yeah, it's just a fascinating story that Amber's been just nonstop talking about for a while.
Have I been nagging to do this one? I honestly, I just had it in the back of my head because I heard about this topic on another podcast called Stuff You Missed in History.
Right.
So, yeah, they did a really good job, and it just got me really just focused on pirates and just, like, how freaking cool they are, man.
It is so cool. When I was a kid, I was absolutely obsessed with pirates. Literally, for like 5 years straight, all of my birthday parties were pirate themed.
Didn't you guys name that rock at Christina Lake Pirate Point?
Pirate
too?
Point, yeah, we named it. Yeah, it's like a little peninsula kind of thing. Yeah, we would go canoe over, and absolutely. But I think what's most fascinating about the Anne Bonny and Mary Read and their story is just the idea of, like, we all know of, you know, Blackbeard and pirate stories and stuff like that growing up. Everybody kind of hears vague kind of stories about this, and we just know how intense they are, and the idea that two women could hold their own on a ship back then is so cool. It is like intense because the life on a ship was intense, and on a pirate ship especially, obviously.
And women were not welcome usually.
Right,
and
exactly.
we'll get into that because there's definitely some switching up of gender roles in this story and some gender ambiguity for a lot of it, which is quite entertaining.
It is.
And a lot of it is, again, like, the stuff of legend. So we're going to get into all that. But first, I think we wanted to start off with just a general sort of get into a little bit of the background of this story and sort of where Anne and Mary fit in.
Right.
Because they came about during the end of the golden era of piracy in the Caribbean, and their time was definitely marked by a very negative, hostile attitude towards piracy on the part of the British Crown and the Spanish, everywhere. Yeah. Everywhere that was established, because there was definitely France was a player, all the colonial people, right? So you had France, you had the Spanish, and then you had the British, and
the Portuguese were in there too.
The Dutch were there, all of them. So it was just like a big mix, and by this point, pirates were no longer welcome. Yeah. But that was not the case originally.
No, there was an evolution of piracy, and it definitely didn't go in the direction of pleasantries, let's say.
Well, between colonial powers especially. Right. A lot of it has to do with politics. Yeah. And the famous line that the Pope drew on the world map basically divided the world into two sections. The New World was just gifted to the Spanish. Right. And
he just drew it right through the middle of the Atlantic Ocean.
He did,
took I'm assuming not a jiffy marker, obviously. It was just a big
quill. Quill of some kind.
Some eagle quill. It's just so hilarious. It's like the Pope just decides that you get this half.
Right? How does that even make sense? So wait a second. Does that mean that the Brits get all the other half? Like, is that how it works?
Yeah, what about everyone else, man?
Right? Because they were simultaneously colonizing all along the coasts of Africa and all down, obviously, the Americas. Right. So it's just very interesting to me to think that, like, everyone seemed to be okay with it at first. Yeah. Right? There wasn't really, because, like, the Pope, I guess by this point...
Which Pope was it?
I'm actually not even sure, but I think he was a Spanish Pope because he was definitely favoring the Spanish. Indeed. And on top of that, I believe by this point, the Brits had already formed the Anglican Church. They'd already had the Protestant Revolution, all this stuff. As far as I'm aware. But if anyone can prove me wrong, please do. Because
that wasn't really the focus for this episode, so if you have any info, you can shout it out for sure.
But anyways, so essentially what happened was this occurred. And all of the Americas were just called, like, New Spain or whatever. Yeah. And then eventually the Brits started to get pretty jealous because they saw the wealth that the Spaniards, Spaniards, were reaping, the conquistadors. Yes. But anyways.
No, they were looting and they were doing quite well in their heyday.
They were doing fabulously. And they were bringing home huge boatloads of treasure and... establishing along the way, like, colonies across the Bahamas and in the Caribbean. They definitely started to install, like what am I trying to say? Herds of livestock.
Right, yeah, they brought animals with them, so they were looking long term, obviously, right? Yeah, they were flora and fauna and supplanting their livelihoods.
Exactly, and so that was just a way to ensure that they actually had stuff to eat along the way. Yeah. And these guys actually flourished. There were just wild herds of pigs, they had cows, I believe sheep, goats, that type of thing. It was flourishing. And then, of course, you get these British eyes, not Spanish eyes, British eyes. They're starting to get pretty envious. And so that's where we kind of get into Cromwell.
Yeah. So
you looked into Cromwell a bit, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean just a little bit. He was a military political leader for the English, and he served as Lord Protector of the Commonwealth of England and Scotland and Ireland. And that was from, I believe, in the 1650s. Until his death, but he was a motivated guy, and he ended up leading a fleet of British ships over to the New World to basically confront the Spanish.
Alrighty. So that's pretty daring, actually, because they were pretty well established.
They were. I mean, they rigged together a sizable fleet themselves, the English, and experienced seamen, and they were. Yeah. And they needed to kind of they needed to assert dominance in the Caribbean, right? Because the Spanish were basically, they had a stronghold there, and if the English were going to have any chance of establishing the same sort of, eventually what would become like New England and these types of things, even, further north on the coast, they needed to have more control over the seas because they didn't. And so they were sending ships to Hispaniola, the island of Hispaniola, which is now obviously the Dominican Republic and Haiti, which was Spanish controlled. And that didn't go so well. They get there, they make a relatively safe voyage across the Atlantic.
It didn't go so well.
But they, I mean, what did you find on that?
Well, obviously, it was a massive failure. That's what I saw. And I thought it was very interesting because part of the crew that was enlisted in part of these fleets was none other than Henry Morgan, who basically went on to be one of the most famous buccaneer pirates in history.
Right.
And so, essentially, what happened was... So the story goes, the seamless narrative that I was watching in a documentary last night was essentially, it fails. And then they look to none other than Jamaica, because they can't actually, they were pretty severely wounded. There was a lot that died in the original offensive, and so they didn't really have the means to make the trip home.
Yeah, like they lost supplies, they lost a lot. Yeah, they weren't able to do much else other than kind of limp their way over to another island, I guess.
To Jamaica, yeah. And so it wasn't really pretty over there as well, as far as I could tell. But essentially what happened was... Henry and all these other, Henry Morgan, I should say, all these other troops, they ended up establishing what's known as Port Royal.
Yeah, the infamous pirate city is sort of how it's gone down in history.
Yeah.
But, of course, at first it was just the English Caribbean stronghold, the capital of Port Royal.
Well, that's where it gets interesting. Because when this all happened, essentially what happened was... The British Crown they obviously had to hire people to take care of this port.
Right.
They had to have some sort of arrangement. I'm thinking, like, it's almost similar to, like, the heydays of, like, the mob or something, where it was, like, they were, like, hired to protect. There was, like, there was secretive contracts, that type of thing. And,
for sure.
And so people like Henry Morgan became buccaneers. Yeah. Buccaneers, which essentially is an anglicized word that came from French for jerky, which is what these guys were eating. It was just vagabonds. It was criminals. It was people that obviously, like, were just deplorables and unsuitable for life, and they were looking for something new.
They were ragtag crews.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's why all these people were finding themselves in the New World. A lot of them were jumping ship, that type of thing, and they would find themselves trying to live on these islands, these tiny islands that were sporadically populated with these boars and these cows and everything. And so essentially they crafted a method of just drying the meat and, like, having basically a spit, and then they would form the meat into jerky, and then buccaneers was the word, I guess, in French for that. Yeah. And so, anyways, that's a total side note.
Isn't that hilarious?
But
though?
Isn't that cool?
I thought that was so interesting. It's like because people will be like, it's such a cool word, like a buccaneer. You know what I mean? Like sailing the high seas. It's like a jerky. It
means jerky.
But it makes sense.
So this guy, anyways, getting back to Henry Morgan here, he essentially becomes the Sword of England. And they were freaking ruthless, man. And it was all wink, wink, nod, nod, buddy, buddy with the crown. And it was all condoned. He actually had what was called, what is it called? It's a note of, or a letter of something. Oh
basically like the pirate era version of the James Bond License to Kill.
A letter of marque, yes. So these were carried by privateers, essentially like Henry Morgan, and they were letters from the crown to signify that they were actually legally attacking and plundering Spanish ships and then splitting the profits back with their hometown.
Yeah. Hometown team.
Woo. Yeah, they're playing favorites, and so they would target these Spanish ships and other merchant vessels, that type of thing. And it got pretty nasty, and it actually culminated in war between the colonial powers in the area. So it was a 12 to 13 year war. It started in 1701 and it went on to 1713, and it actually ended in the Treaty of Utrecht. I believe the war was called Queen Anne's War.
Right, okay.
Queen Anne's War. And so before this time, essentially the Caribbean was just a wild, wild west.
Yeah.
And you could basically get away with anything you wanted. And it even became even more so for pirates after this treaty was signed, because essentially what happened was all parties agreed that they would not attack and they would not support the attack and plunder of merchant vessels of a foreign origin. So in that sense, it was just free game for the pirates. They're like, okay, well, you guys, you know what I mean? Like, they're just like, well, we can attack you then. We're going to attack British ships. We're going to attack whatever we want now because we're in it for ourselves now. If there's no, and they didn't have to split the profits anymore.
Well, exactly. And
so that's a huge thing.
If they did, they had no other option. I mean, that was their livelihood, right? Like being privateers. And now with the way things are changing, they had no. They're not going to change.
There was a big economic downturn that occurred right after this treaty was signed because all of these people were put out of work, essentially. Right. And all the bars, all the shops, all the merchants, they were run aground, essentially, because all these people they weren't plundering, they weren't spending money anymore. Yeah. So it actually...
need the pirates.
It had a huge effect.
Absolutely.
And Port Royal was obviously probably pretty hurting by this point.
Well, but it's solely dependent on that.
Exactly. When did Port Royal actually go down?
Ooh, well, that's actually a point I wanted to make, because the reason you might be wondering, those who are familiar with Port Royal and with pirate stories and stuff, why we're not getting into too much details with Port Royal, because it deserves its own episode.
It does,
and it's going to get it. So we're not going to go into too many details on Port Royal,
exactly,
because it's such a fascinating story in and of itself.
Yes,
but anyway,
so where are we now? We're up to the treaty and the end of this war.
Right.
And so essentially privateering becomes pirating and it becomes punishable by death. Yeah.
And that's, the way that's portrayed in like the Pirates of the Caribbean's movies and stuff like that, with the, hanging corpses outside of, either off the front ends of ships or outside of ports and things like that. It was definitely a thing.
Yeah.
And it was already intense from, like 12 years of war. And now all of a sudden your livelihood is you have a mark on you. It's
gone. And they actually ended up establishing another stronghold. It was on this island called New Providence Island, and the city was called Nassau.
Okay.
And so it basically just became the new pirate hub as opposed to Port Royal. Obviously, pirates were not welcome there anymore.
Right.
And that was essentially the place where Anne Bonny would meet her fateful lover.
That's right.
Captain Calico Jack. But, yeah.
But before we get into that... we have a little promo break.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
From someone in our new Podfix Network family.
Yeah. So actually, we should have mentioned off the top. We're a part of the Podfix Network. So you can find us at podfixnetwork.com, along with a bunch of other awesome shows. And one of those awesome shows is Who Spiked the Puns?
Ooh. Yeah, they do a great job.
It's a super funny, go over like mashups of movies and stuff. It's just super entertaining and definitely worth a listen and a subscribe. So take a listen to this promo and check out Who Spiked the Puns.
Greetings and salutations. This is Fuzzy Dan from Who Spiked the Puns. Each week, with the help of some of my special friends from around the internet, we'll be mashing together two disparate movies to make something unexpectedly awesome. This is the podcast that doesn't take itself too seriously, because everybody knows fat puns don't fly. Find me now on whospikethepuns.com or on a podcatcher near you.
And we're back.
Mm-hmm.
So we're moving into the nitty-gritty. We're going to talk about Mary Read and Anne Bonny and get into their background.
Yes. So we did a little bit of a lead up there, just gave some context as to what sort of atmosphere they were entering.
Yeah, an intense one.
One where they were basically hunted.
Super gnarly.
Yeah, and that actually, I think, plays heavily into Anne Bonny's fascination with pirates and her wanting to become part of that scene. But we're going to start off with Mary.
Okay.
I think that's a good place to start.
Sure.
Yeah, so Mary Read was born in 1691, and she was actually born in England, allegedly an illegitimate daughter of a captain's widow.
Okay.
Yeah, and so Read's mother, she was kind of down on her luck. She actually was married at one point, and then he ended up dying or leaving her. The story is pretty vague.
Okay.
And she had a son with this man. And so when Mary comes into the picture is after he's left or dead. And she, being a young woman, just a little bit reckless, ends up becoming impregnated again.
Yeah.
And at the time, she was actually living with her husband's relatives, but she ended up leaving because of her shame.
Yeah, okay.
And she didn't actually tell them, as far as the story goes, or the legend goes, I should say, that she didn't even tell them she was pregnant. And so what happened was, unfortunately, the son, the legitimate son, ended up dying. And in order to secure financial support, her mother craftily disguised Mary as a boy and passed her off as her older, I guess it would have been her, like, half-brother. And, yeah, it was successful for quite a few years until the grandmother ended up dying. And so, anyways, yeah, Mary ended up living most of her childhood posing as boy, wearing boys' clothes. She adopted the personality and the name Mark. So, yeah, she basically, out of necessity, was cross-dressing. And it kind of led into, she really kind of became, I don't know, I'm just kind of like, the feel that I got from the accounts I read was that she did really feel like one of her identities was Mark, but she was never, like, a lesbian. She definitely was attracted to men. And she ended up joining the army as a foot soldier.
Right.
And that's where she met her husband. And she was still in disguise. She joined as a man and ended up revealing herself to him at an opportune moment, I guess, when they had a sec.
Hey, by the way.
Just FYI, I'm not a man. Yeah. So anyways, so she ended up marrying and opening up a little eatery. And then he ended up dying.
So her life was set up to be not so crazy.
Well,
and then it kind of, like her mother, sort of runs into a little bit of bad luck.
Yeah. So she had a bit of a rough go.
Yeah.
I would maybe say.
And this is all when she's still quite young, obviously, right? This is like early 20s kind of thing.
Not even.
Or late teens.
Yeah, late teens. I think she was home from her serving duty when she was maybe 20. Married at 20, and then he was dead by the time she was 21, kind of thing.
Boy, were things different back in the day.
Yeah. and it, yeah, she really gravitated towards this identity as a means to sort of pursue her own opportunities, because obviously men were afforded a lot more during that time. And so she decided to retain this identity of Mark. And so, again, once her husband died, she resumed it out of necessity.
Yeah.
And she ended up, like, just becoming a stowaway, essentially. And she made her way to the West Indies. And it's not really sure, she was just kind of bouncing around. I had one account where she was known to the governor of the British governor of wherever in the Bahamas. Her identity was known. She was a wanted woman. There is evidence that after she and Bonny had hooked up, well, not like hooked up, but you know what I mean. Had met up, and were acquainted with one another, that both of their names were put on a wanted poster.
Really?
Yeah, most wanted in the Caribbean. So that's pretty badass.
You have to wonder though, because it is so vague. Like, what did she hear in the? I mean, presumably Mary ended up as a stowaway heading to the West Indies because she had heard about the lifestyle and the way out for her in, like, saloons, from people around ports and things like that. It had to have just been word of mouth.
Well, that was,
because
she is the classic vagabond case, right?
Yeah.
Except she's not a man, she's a woman. And she was doing it because she didn't really have any other way. Like, what are you gonna do? I guess she could have maybe tried to have run the eatery by herself. I don't know. Maybe she wasn't able to, though, financially.
I feel like it sounds like one of those situations where it's just almost like a snap. Like, she had to take control in a more serious way than just to be like, I'm going to power through this on my own. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it was outright pursuing piracy directly.
No.
Right? Because that's something we come across later.
Yeah.
But it was definitely a way of at least exposing you to other opportunities, I guess, right? Although taking a massive risk doing it, like life or death at sea. It's
exactly.
Yeah, and obviously concealing an identity at the same time, like, super dangerous.
Yeah, there is one statement, and this was from David Cordingley's Seafaring Women, which talks about pirates, sailors' wives, and stowaways, and he states in it that Mary had later stated she didn't go willingly into this lifestyle, but the life of the pirate was something she always abhorred and only went into it upon compulsion. So, yeah, so we kind of get that. I'm not sure if she was committing acts of piracy before she met up with Anne Bonny and Calico Jack,
right.
But we'll get into that in a little bit. I think, maybe, do you want to dive into the origin story of Anne Bonny?
Yeah, there's, excuse me, there's less known about Anne Bonny. Yeah, I mean, most of it's derived from this book from Captain Charles Johnson, A General History of Pirates, spelled with a Y, P-Y-R-A-T-S, which is kind of
Very
interesting,
cool.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And an interesting point about that is obviously there's speculation as to who actually wrote this, because there isn't a record of a Captain Charles Johnson really to be found anywhere.
Yeah.
So the question is it an alias of another captain, or is it an alias of a writer? And some people have, I believe it was in the 1930s, there was an American literary researcher of some kind or whatever. He's the one who put forth this idea that it could have been Daniel Defoe, the author of Robinson Crusoe.
Interesting.
Who published over 500 books and pamphlets and all kinds of different stuff. Anyway, but we do know that Anne Bonny was born Anne Cormac in Cork, Ireland, around 1700, but it is uncertain whether or not her father was indeed this guy named William Cormac, who was a wealthy lawyer, prominent lawyer, who had, very much like the situation of Mary, an illegitimate relationship with a family, with a servant.
Right.
In the house.
Yeah, this is actually hilarious. When I was reading through Cordingley's account, the same guy that I just mentioned previously that wrote Seafaring Women, which is actually called The Adventures of Pirates, Sailors' Wives, and Stowaways. He describes how Anne came into this world, this is a quote, "As a result of a complex saga involving the theft of some silver spoons, the lawyer sleeping with his wife when he thought he was sleeping with the maid, and the maid being sent to prison, the lawyer and the wife had a quarrel and separated." End quote. So, I don't know, it's just like this hilarious, like, weird, it almost reminded me of Faulty Towers.
Oh my gosh. Totally.
Right? It's just
you
like...
accidentally, like, you know, yeah.
Who knows? Like, how do you accidentally...
I don't know.
Sleep with your wife when you thought you were sleeping with the maid? I don't understand that.
Or vice versa, obviously. Anyway, that's a Basil Fawlty move, I suppose.
It definitely is. But I think it was pretty conclusive that it was William Cormac. And I had multiple accounts kind of supporting that.
Good.
But maybe they were all sourced from the same or uncertain. But yeah, you don't know. Who knows?
I mean, yeah, it's definitely leaning that way. And it makes sense because the story kind of continues on that... there's a few other sort of interesting points here, though. Like... when she was quite young, they left England, they left the UK, and
why? Like that was there's a lot of ambiguity surrounding that as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, would you have just done that just because you slept with the maid? Probably not. Like why? Like what was the reasoning?
That was definitely, there was a lot of inconsistencies there. Several accounts sort of alluded to the idea that, so basically what happened was Cormac sleeps with the maid, accidentally impregnates her. She obviously has the kid. It's not a legitimate kid. It's not born into the household. Obviously, it's not his wife that's having it.
Yep.
So the child is not in the house, is what I would assume, or it would be in the servants' quarters.
Yeah.
And so essentially what the father did was, because he was so fond of Anne and really liked her, and he tried to pass her off as in some accounts it says tried to pass her off as a distant relative. In others accounts it says that he tried to pass her off as a clerk that he was training. And so in that way, he dressed her up as a boy in order to pass her off. I think that makes more sense, like training to be a clerk.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make any sense if you're a distant relative. Why would you dress her up like a boy or girl?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's whatever. But obviously, if you're trained to be a lawyer, you gotta be a man, because they're back in the 1700s.
But just again, this is just the same sort of, forced to dress like a boy.
Yeah.
That sort of almost in a way seems like it manifested sort of this tomboy persona that they took on. That they were
a rebellious persona.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's where I think the scandal comes out, because they're still in Cork at this time. And the wife realizes what's going on, and it just becomes a scandal. Obviously, people start spreading rumors. His practice starts to suffer, and so he ends up packing the family and taking them to America.
I mean, I guess that makes sense.
That makes sense to me.
I guess that makes sense. I mean, when you think about it, it's hard to put yourself in the 1700s, but obviously, I mean, I forced my way through reading Middlemarch, and that was, I think, earlier, but yeah, these types of things were a big deal back in the day.
It was, yeah, scandal and reputation, and people stepping outside those lines of conformity. That is a big deal.
Yeah.
And you can't really make it as a lawyer or professional person if that is what people are thinking about you and talking about
So they, as the story goes, then they bipped off to Charleston, South Carolina.
Charleston!
And who he sort
Famous
of changed.
pirate capital again. Like, there's so many stories I came across that were like talking about like standoffs and anyways, we're getting off topic.
There's so many pirate episodes to be had. Like, I have a feeling we're going to do a pirate series.
We should even do like a listener call out. Like, tell us your favorite pirate stories, your favorite characters.
Let's do that right now. Send us your favorite pirate stories.
Do it.
And we will do a series on pirates, and we'll cover it all.
Yes. Yes. It'll be like a whole month of pirate episodes. No. Okay. Anyways.
Okay. So, but her father sort of switches careers over there. He's not practicing law. He ends up acquiring some land and actually develops it into a quite successful plantation. He becomes a plantation owner, and he was successful enough.
Do you know what kind of fruit it was? Was it pineapples?
No, I don't think so.
No? Charleston?
No. Do they?
Cotton?
No.
Cotton, probably.
Cotton, yeah.
I would think cotton.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Anyway.
Had to be cotton.
Why do you say pineapples? Just because we were thinking of like the Dole plantation, when I went to Hawaii.
I have pineapples in the brain right now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, you want a pineapple?
Please.
That's what I mean.
Grilled pineapples.
Pirates should have been eating more pineapples. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Wouldn't get any scurvy.
Well, they would add lemon juice to their grog to try to avoid once they sort of caught on to scurvy.
Really?
That was their way of getting some lemon juice or any citrus juice.
Lemons?
On the islands they were visiting.
I thought lemons were like Mediterranean in origin.
I don't know. I guess people had brought them over by this point.
Citrus fruits. Okay.
The Spanish must
limes, maybe.
Limes? Citrus
Limes,
fruits? I mean, there's definitely citrus fruits around, right? Anyway.
There's lots of citrus.
That's just a fun fact. Fun facts.
Cool.
On it. Cool story, bro.
The more you know.
The more you, yeah. And now I've lost my train of thought.
Sorry. So they moved to Charleston.
Right.
In the plantation.
Okay.
Plantation.
Right.
Okay.
And they... So yeah, but he was successful enough that he could afford to sort of raise Anne to be like middle class, like upper middle class. She wasn't in the same position as Mary was,
right.
so to speak, right? So
Very
that's
privileged.
why, yeah, she was in a privileged position, which makes it kind of interesting that she chose the life that she did, right?
Or is it? Maybe she's just bored and she feels slightly. I would honestly, if I was born as the maid's daughter, and then I'm kind of brought into this household, and there's probably some tumultuous feelings. Like I would like I don't even know. Did her father actually were they permanently separated, or did he bring her over to America too?
That I don't know. I mean, that's what I mean.
That's a missing piece of the story.
Well, you've got more information on the father than I did, because
I didn't get that piece.
Okay,
so that's really interesting.
I mean, the sources I looked at even said they weren't even sure if it was.
Sure of what?
It was just a lot of it was unclear about the dad, about Cormac. Like, so that, yeah, I have no idea. I have no idea.
That's interesting, because it was quite clear to me in a lot of sources.
Yeah, I know, and I'm glad you came across that, because that's obviously the way it is.
Yeah, so as far as, like, that whole... I'm just trying to think of... Okay, you come from this sort of... this background where you are sort of illegitimate. You know, you kind of come up feeling like a little bit like, oh, the world's maybe against you a tiny bit. You had to move all the way across the world because of the scandal involved in your birth. Right. And then you're raised in this household where your father's probably doting on you, because he seemed to spoil her quite a bit. Like, he loved this girl. Why the frick would you have an illegitimate... You didn't even have to acknowledge their existence, and he has her raising her in his household.
Right.
So in that sense, I feel like there could have been some sort of just elements of rebellious animosity that, you know, like a privileged girl might have.
I guess.
And
Yeah,
it's almost
I
like
can
the
see that.
classic good girl gone bad type thing where she's like, I just want to prove myself and I want to, like, you know what I mean? Like,
It seems that way.
It kind of does in a sense. And even like that history doc that we watched was saying, like, you know, like a lot of those things where she was a beautiful woman that once she ran away and stuff, like we'll get into that. But yeah, she was basically like a star of like the bars that she habited and all this stuff. And, and just kind of like a bit of an outsider, but a very dominant personality.
Oh, for sure. And I think a much more dominant personality than Mary was.
Yes, Mary was more meek, seemingly.
Mary kind of like developed her skills, whereas I think it just came naturally to Anne.
Yeah.
And
she reveled in it. She loved it.
Yeah, like even from a young age, like she wasn't taking any nonsense from anybody. She even stabbed a maid at the age of 13 just because she like ticked her off.
That's insane.
She took a dinner knife and stabbed her.
Like, yeah, she got into all these fights, all this trouble, and she ended up marrying this penniless pirate named James Bonny. And then once she did that, her father disowned her. He was like, nope, not having any of that. You're disinherited. You're not getting any money. And so they went to the pirate hotspot in the Bahamas. I can't remember it was some bay that they went to. It was probably Port Royal if Port Royal wasn't underwater by this point.
It wouldn't. I don't think it wouldn't. It would have been by this point.
Okay.
So yeah, they had.
Actually, no. It would have been. It would have been what we mentioned right off the break, right? It was Nassau.
Right.
In New Providence.
Right. Of course. Yes.
In the Bahamas.
Yeah.
Right. Duh. Sorry, we had a dumb moment there.
That's okay.
Dumb.
So anyway, yeah. So she hooks up with James Bonny. She runs off. James becomes an informant for the Governor Woods.
Kind of does like a little flip flop there. Right?
Yeah. So he's kind of. But he was in deep with the pirate scene.
And she was in deeper, I think, than him. I think she was more committed.
And I don't think he knew that.
No.
Like, judging by any of this, right?
I think he thought that she would be a convenient way to, like, have an inheritance and have some money.
That's what it seems to be.
Yes.
And he got played.
He did kind of get played. Because she just left him. She didn't even divorce him. She didn't do anything. She just left him for Calico. Calico. She was enamored by all accounts.
So who is this guy? Who is this Calico?
Who's Calico Jack? He was a very colorful character, hey?
Yeah, I mean,
how could he not be?
I mean, most people have probably heard that name before. Mm-hmm. It's in a lot of pop culture stuff, video games, all kinds of different things. But yeah, Pirate Calico Jack, John Rackham.
Jack Rackham.
Sorry, Jack Rackham.
John Rackham, a.k.a. Calico Jack. So you did Jack and John.
John and Jack.
Johnny Jackser. Whatever.
That is a pirate. That is a pirate name, though. If that is such a good pirate name. Like,
and they call him that because of his flamboyant dress.
Okay,
right?
but that is the only irony of it. It's an awesome pirate name. It sounds so badass, but then it's Calico because he wore these super
ridiculous
bright,
outfits.
ridiculous, just pompous, like.
Oh man.
He like when you look at the they're not like the paintings of these guys.
Could you imagine like coming across that dude? You're just like, he walks into the bar, you're just like,
You'd be like, yeah,
you're wearing your like plain dirty linens.
Yeah,
you're just like, yeah, that guy's got it going on. Apparently,
so he stood out.
He just went over to Louis Vuitton over there and just picked up some,
the Louis, like the actual like King
Louis
of France.
Vuitton. Yeah, King Louis just raided his wardrobe and he came over to the New World.
That's pretty much what it looked like. Honestly, it was that.
And we're gonna have pictures of all these colorful characters on our website, so be sure to check that out.
So let's just assume here, like Anne Bonny, she was a bit of a She was a sucker for this stuff. She was kind of materialistic.
And she grew up, so she was born roughly in 1700.
Yeah.
She grew up in an era where pirates were superstars, right?
Mm-hmm.
Blackbeard, superstar.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they were all super badass. It was like, he seriously was. It was like today's version of Hollywood, right? Actors, but not legitimate, right? So it was almost like mobsters.
Yeah,
like had that the gangster appeal.
Yeah, totally.
It was totally badass.
Yeah,
and so she grew up just I'm assuming just
idolizing.
Exactly. Yeah, just coveting it and wanting to be a part of it so bad.
Right.
And then she comes across this guy who is the quintessential pirate. And so you kind of came up with some more information on him, right?
Well, let's see here. Let me find
How
my
old
spots.
was this guy when he met her, even, I wonder?
Well, he was born quite a bit before she was,
really?
around 1680.
Oh, so he's like 20 years her senior.
So he was quite a bit older. So he would have been, late 20s, I guess, around the time they linked up.
Okay.
And by this point, he was obviously already well known in the Caribbean. He was one of the most dominant figures. People feared him. He was brutal and ruthless and just all those things, all those typical things, right? Like
not quite as badass as like Blackbeard.
Not as intense. I think he had. I mean,
especially in the end, right? I think Blackbeard's ending was way more epic.
Yeah, I'd say so.
And we'll get into that in another episode.
Sure. Yeah, Calico's was, well, we'll get to his. Yeah, he had sort of a funny end, but
Calico did.
Yeah, well,
he did. Yeah,
kind of.
It wasn't very honorable. But anyways, we'll get into that in a second.
Anyway, but he started his career serving under the renowned pirate named Charles Vane, who this was in the early part of 1718, and then he quickly kind of rose ranks until he became the captain of his own ship and kind of began doing his own thing.
And so that is about the time that Calico would have linked up with Anne Bonny.
That's right.
Yeah, and so the story goes that he actually was at one of the bars or taverns in Cassau or whatever it was that we...
Nassau?
Nassau, right. Sorry, yeah. Cassau, Nassau.
Close enough. I mean, she was frequenting these establishments.
She was. And this was while she was still married. And she was quickly becoming disillusioned with her sort of turncoat husband who was working for the governor secretly and spying on pirates, which is not cool, man.
He wasn't hardcore enough for her.
Yeah, he's a narc.
Yeah, exactly.
And so she ended up spying this man one night dressed in brightly colored Indian calico cloth.
Yeah.
And realized that she needed some of that. And so they ended up running away together. She never bothered divorcing.
No, she just pieced the scene.
Bonny. What was his name? Tom Bonny or something?
James Bonny.
James Bonny. Yeah, James, you were just not cut. He wasn't cut from the same cloth. Or
oh, pun
the cut of his
intended.
jib was not quite enough for her. Anyways, those are both really bad.
Nautical pun and oh my god, too many puns. Lots of puns.
What is a jib, actually?
Is
it a cut of meat?
It's... No.
No?
A jib. No, a jib is a...
I don't like the cut of your
I'm not a
jib.
sailor, but I think jib is either one of the smaller sails or it's a rope.
Really?
Yeah.
We need a fact checker. Okay. So, let's go
Sailors out there, tell us what a jib is exactly. I mean, my dad's a sailor. We could ask him. But anyway.
Well, he's not right here, so... Let's get his opinion after. Anyways, so it was about this time, yeah, so they ended up hooking up and they went to sea together because they realized that her marriage was falling apart and she wasn't interested anymore and she just wanted a new adventure. And I don't know if she was more the driving force behind it all, but obviously he was already a pirate. So she just kind of started riding that pony, just, What's the I keep trying to come up with stupid turns of phrase that aren't working out for me right now.
It's just one of those days.
I guess.
What the heck was the ship called that they left on?
The Revenge.
That was Calico's ship?
The Revenge, yes.
Dang.
I know, right? And that's actually really close. I feel like he must have named it after the Queen Anne's Revenge, which was Blackbeard's famous ship.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he was kind of following in those footsteps and wanting to appear to be as badass as Blackbeard was, I guess.
Right, yeah. So they're sailing around on this Revenge, and then they happen to link up with none other than Mark Reed, a.k.a. Mary Reed.
And you said this before we started recording. Mm-hmm. What the heck? What are the odds of that happening? Like, really?
Right, yeah.
Of them both ending up on the same ship.
It's insane, because this... It makes me wonder, were there a lot more women dressing up as men than are recorded in history?
And they just weren't as,
Or is this just the most brilliant Hollywood plot that you've ever come up with, but it's 17th century?
Yeah.
And you know what I mean?
It writes itself.
It does, yeah, it lends itself to fantasy and fiction, but remarkable, right?
Yeah.
And so what happens is Mark ends up joining the crew.
Yeah.
It is, again, very hazy as to whether it was through her own volition or whether she was just kind of compelled to a certain extent, either die or become a pirate. I think I'll become a pirate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I probably would too, to be honest.
No doubt.
And especially if she is able to have this alternate persona where she isn't a vulnerable woman, she is a man. And so the story goes, or legend goes, I should say, Anne developed a crush on Mark.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
this was recorded in that General History of Pirates by that disputed author. I would just call him anonymous by this point. And we'll get into that in a little bit here because there's some juicy tidbits involving that as well.
Definitely.
But yeah, so essentially there is a lover's triangle happening, and I guess what happens is Mark is forced to reveal herself to Anne.
To Anne Bonny.
In order to save her skin, so to speak, because Calico Jack was about to string her up, I think.
Yeah.
He was getting to the end of his rope.
Well, he was, he was, according to the history of pirates, he was basically saying to Anne, he knew what was up, he knew something was up, and he was like, you're going to slit his throat if this continues.
And that was almost a test for her, seemingly, is what it comes across as.
Oh, for sure.
It's like a test of loyalty. If you don't do this, then that shows that you are more loyal to Mark than you are to me.
Exactly.
And in the pirate world, I feel like that would not go very well for you.
No, that's pretty much all you have in the pirate world is loyalty.
Yes.
And so, of course, Mary hasn't had no choice but to reveal her identity. But what was interesting in that, it was sort of, I mean, it states this in the Brief History of Pirates, which we will have in our sources that you guys should definitely check out. It's really interesting. Mm-hmm. But it was sort of not entirely clear how quickly Rackham knew of this, knew that she was a female, whether it was right away
days,
or
weeks, months,
whether or not she kept that under, whether it was just the two of them held that secret. Yeah. But definitely at some point he found out. And it was basically because to save both of their skin, right? Both Mark, Mary, and Anne. And the three of them then kept that secret from the crew.
Right. And so Mark was Mark still.
Yeah.
Mary under wraps.
Yeah. And Calico knew it.
Interesting.
And my rationale for that is basically that if the crew found out, it wouldn't look good for Calico, right? It would be you're being manipulated by these two women potentially, or you didn't know, so you're out
soft.
of it, and so like it,
and then the whole idea of like women are not welcome on board.
They're
thought
seen
of
as
recreation.
Luck.
They're not thought of as part of your crew,
and seen of as bad luck, like just straight superstition. Women on ships were not good luck.
And I feel like that probably came about as a result of, like, if there's one woman and a bunch of men on board,
Yeah, that's not the best.
Not the best scenario.
No.
Especially over extended periods of months at sea.
No.
Like a night, sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's actually why, I mean, it's common knowledge that, pirates kind of got together like men. Right?
Mm-hmm.
They practiced.
Boys weren't allowed on board either because they were vulnerable and they were susceptible too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But they ended up in relationships together because they're out at sea for months and years, and there's they're just there's small groups of men together. And
it's funny actually. That reminds me of Pirates of the Caribbean. You know those two, the couple. They're not a couple, but they are. They're like the two, the one with the eyeball that keeps popping out.
And that's exactly what it was.
And they're just like a couple kind of. They're like together, and it works.
Exactly.
Right?
It's not necessarily like a romantic relationship. It's just like a companion.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
a partner.
It did they did hook up.
Yeah.
Like, right? Like
probably
there was
a necessity. Like, dang,
yeah,
you
exactly.
got stuff, I got stuff.
Exactly. But then they would go to shore and they would like share their prostitutes and share their wealth from plundering and all this kind of stuff, and it was almost just like a very partner communal. In crime kind of thing.
And very egalitarian. They
very
actually
much
had a lot of democratic voting elements as far as leadership goes and that type of thing.
Apparently they did have legit weddings though, like except it wasn't a wedding in the sense that we would think of it, but it was more of like a agreement ceremony to be like, we're going to share our booty, we're going to share this together.
Okay.
So it's not like a vows up at the front with a priest or something, but it was like a ceremonial kind of a thing.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
It's like a
partnership.
Yeah.
But like more intimate.
Yeah. I wonder if things would have been signed, like documents.
You'd think so. I mean,
maybe,
we didn't go into depth with that research.
We're kind of getting off on a tangent.
We are in a bit of.
But that does actually it helps illuminate the potential possibilities for what this crew was like, because it was a crew of 12.
Yeah.
12 to 14. Some accounts say 12 men plus the 2 women, and some accounts say 12 crew. So.
Right.
Anyways, small crew, right?
Yeah.
So you would think it's quite intimate, and maybe perhaps they were just a disparate band, but they were loyal to a certain extent, and they just were able to get along, and that's why... Because that's the other thing, too, because I came across accounts where it was suggested that Anne Bonny and Mary Read were actually... They enjoyed a lesbian relationship together.
Yeah, I've seen that as well.
And then there was other accounts where Anne Bonny always dressed as a man. She wasn't a woman on board with Calico Jack.
Right.
And so in that account, then that would be even weirder, right? Because she would have to reveal herself to Mark and say, hey, I'm a woman and you're a man, so therefore we can be together, only to find out that Mark is actually
to get the same response in return. Yeah, it would definitely make it awkward.
It makes me wonder if there's other stories really similar to this that just aren't out, like, you know, like they're just hidden.
There's not as infamous because of the end result. I guess.
They're just more like, you know, in the shadows, not as, because obviously the culmination of this was pretty epic, and it is fairly well recorded. There are documentations of the trial and everything. So I guess that's kind of where we're going.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's the story of how they got there.
Exactly.
Right. Did you want to? I mean, you did a really good job of it when we were looking at the notes. Did you want to kind of? I mean, we alluded to it in the intro, obviously.
We did. So. Yeah, essentially what went down was Rackham and his crew, they definitely had some exploits. They definitely picked up the attention of the crown and specifically of Governor Woods, who was in charge of the Caribbean area. That was the British side of it, at least. Right. And so anyways, yes, they were definitely wanted people. And...
Which makes me question the choice of wearing such flamboyant clothing and things like that. It's like, it's one thing to be recognizable like Blackbeard was for being so intense and like lighting your face on fire and things like that. But like,
his face, his beard.
Yeah, but like to the onlooker, it's like his
He's like
beard
smoldering.
and face is smoldering and smoking.
Can you imagine being in that room with him?
It's one thing to be recognizable for something like that. It's another to be just like outright recognizable, like seen from 10 miles away because you're wearing this bright red. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just not
calico,
that
Indian calico cloth.
I don't, like, it just doesn't...
Yeah.
Anyway, continue.
So, I guess, they were being trailed. They had a crew of 45 that were after them, were hired pirate hunters.
Yeah.
On behalf of the crown. And they tracked them down to a specific bay. It was called Dry Harbor. Okay. And the pirates were anchored at that bay and had enjoyed many drinks that evening.
Yeah, they had been drinking.
And they were basically stinking drunk when they were come upon by these hunters.
Yeah.
And it was very unfortunate for them. And Calico, he didn't help his case. He actually ended up firing. He was basically just super drunk and overconfident and just like ordered an attack when he probably shouldn't have. They probably should have tried to evade. The only people that were of sound mind were supposedly Bonny and Mary Reed.
Yeah.
And so as they begin firing and the crew's just on all-out attack, they realize that they're outnumbered. It's 12 to 45, man. Like, come on.
Yeah.
So, as the ship drew nearer, the attacking ship, all of the men ended up fleeing the deck, and they were stashed away in the hull when they were come upon by these hunters. And supposedly they were led by one man, Jonathan Barnett, who was a famous pirate hunter.
Yes.
One of the best, which is why the English crown...
hired him to do it.
Exactly. And so, they ended up boarding the ship. The only people that held their ground were Bonny and Reed. They used everything at their disposal. They used their machetes, their cutlasses, their... oh my gosh, there were so many cool weapons I came across. It was like, whoa, man. Like, it was pretty ruthless, right? There was this one, I can't remember what it was called, but it was essentially like a 4 to 6 foot pole with a huge spike on the end of it, and you would just like swing it at people, or you could throw it, and it was very effective against swords, right? Because you have that length.
Of course.
Anyway, so they were ruthless, and they were just...
They held their ground. Like
So they were captured, inevitably. 45 to 12, stinking drunk men down there. No, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like, actually during the attack. So basically you have at first, like you said, like Calico fires a shot at distance, right? They're provoking it, even though they are coming for them. Mm-hmm. And, like, just like in the movies, like, they get up close. They have their grappling hooks, basically, right? They pull the ships together so that they can board. And it's just Bonny and Reed on deck. And... what I came across is like the reason that they weren't drinking as well is because obviously even if they were maybe perhaps pregnant, is some of the speculations along it, like around this time, right? Mm-hmm. It didn't matter. Women were still drinking when they were pregnant back then, right? The reason they weren't drinking is because they needed to keep their wits about them, especially Mary, concealing her identity, right? She couldn't put herself at risk of letting her character go. If she was intoxicated.
Yeah.
So and that makes sense to me.
That does make sense. I never even thought about that.
And then that's why they were the only two sober ones on board.
Interesting.
Totally makes sense.
Huh. So yeah, everyone was captured, and it's interesting because they split up the trials. They tried the men pretty much right away.
Yeah.
I believe the exact date was January 24th, 1720. 1720 or 1721 now. I'm but anyways,
I believe 1720.
I think it was 1720.
Yeah.
And they were all hanged right away.
Yeah.
And they ended up stringing up Calico Jack in one of those famous, those cages overlooking the bay, so everyone coming in would see him. And I feel like that might have even been, they might have paid homage to that in the first Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah,
because you see that it's like all ye pirates be warned,
right?
And then as they're entering Port Royal, So actually, I'm not sure it would have taken place in Jamaica. Yeah, the trial. But anyways, getting back to the important stuff.
Yeah.
So the men were tried, and then the women were tried, and the court records show that essentially they didn't have any defense because they didn't have any witnesses to support their case, and they were trying to plead that they were helpless and they hadn't actively participated and all this stuff, even though it's pretty
clear that they had been.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and this was the other thing that I came across too. They actually tried to use this against I'm not sure exactly which one of the two women it was, but they were obviously choked that the men were down below not helping them during this attack, and one of the two actually fired around beneath the deck, like they were yelling down, being like, "You cowards! Like, what are you, like, get up here!" Basically, right?
Oh my goodness.
And one of them fired around from their pistol beneath and actually killed one of the crew beneath.
Really?
And supposedly, and so they actually tried to end up using that against, I believe it was Mary.
Interesting.
In the trial, which is so ironic because you had just hanged all these guys.
Yeah.
But are you going to try someone for murder for a person you were just going to hang anyway? That's kind of bizarre. You know what I mean?
That's so funny. Oh my goodness. That's hilarious. Ugh. Yeah, and so they were pretty displeased, I think, with their former crewmates. They were not happy to take up the fight while they were all just, drunk as dogs and just, like, waiting to be captured below decks.
Yeah.
Like, really, though? And it's so funny because Anne is actually reported to have famously said about Rackham, if he had fought like a man, he need not have hanged like a dog.
Yeah. What a great line.
Which really speaks to her character, I think, too. Like, she was a fighter, man.
Totally.
Like, and it's just, it's really unfortunate. So, again, what happens is both of these women end up pleading that they're quick with child, so they're pregnant. Yeah. And their execution is stayed, even though they are both convicted of piracy, multiple acts of piracy, and murder, too, that type of thing. And then it just kind of drops off from there, hey? Like, the one vague account we have from St. Catherine's, oh my gosh, what was it? It was a parish in St. Catherine's in Jamaica. Yeah. And it was a record stating that Mary Read had been buried in a graveyard there.
That she had passed away in prison and that she was buried there.
Yeah.
And
that was either a fever or due to childbirth.
Right.
Was the circumstances.
But then it's like, what happened to the kid?
Oh, that's, right. Did it die too?
You know, it's curious how the record sort of stops.
So vague.
And that's sort of the mystery with this. I mean, we usually, our previous episodes are a little bit more mystical. Mm-hmm. This is more of a historical glance at pirates, and specifically, obviously, these two incredible female pirates.
Legends.
But the real mystery is kind of this ending. Anne's ending especially, she sort of just disappears outright. Mm-hmm. Mary, there's these couple of sort of references as to where she ended up. Mm-hmm. But Anne's is a little bit more vague. So, like, some say that she ended up actually giving birth to Rackham's second child and ended up, I don't know, like escaping and basically living out her days.
Well, okay, that's interesting, because I did come across the idea that... obviously it would have been Rackham's, that she was pregnant with. Right. And so by this point, she had already had one child by Rackham. And there's conflicting sort of accounts where one would say that she just gave the baby up. Others say that she lost the baby shortly after giving birth to it. And this comes up after because, a lot of accounts say that her father, William McCormick, had some influence because he was quite a wealthy individual, and he actually played his cards and got her out of prison.
Right.
And brought her back to America, back to Charleston, where she lived out her days, like you said. But there is this idea that he actually ended up sourcing her. He seeked. Oh my gosh. He sought. Yes, thank you. Oh my gosh. He sought out her first child and ended up finding him and bringing him back, and Anne adopted him.
Okay.
And called him John after Rackham.
So that's...
But
that's not definitive, right?
No. None of it is definitive at all. And there's the other idea that she actually went and married another guy by the name of Burleigh and bore several children by him.
Really? Mm-hmm. Okay.
So a lot of different things. And I really, there's not a lot to substantiate any of this. I did come across one website called genie.com, and it's like a genealogy website. Yeah. And it was trying to connect a woman named Anne Bonny to a certain Jethro Bonny, which was supposedly her offspring. But he would have been born in 1735, so that's over 15 years after the trial. So I feel like that timeline doesn't really add up.
She would have been a lot older by then. I mean, yeah, that's a little bit... I suppose it could have been one of her earliest offspring as, like, a grandson.
Maybe.
In their teens, right? Like, if she had a daughter... I don't know.
But that doesn't add up.
That doesn't add up?
Well, she never had a child by her first husband, as far as all the accounts go.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
So it was only Rackham.
Yeah. Right, so if she would have had one with Bonny, then that could have made sense.
Maybe. But yeah, again, there's no evidence to support that she had a child.
Right, because she kind of just pieced the scene on him, like,
she
right
really
away.
did. I don't think she was that. Yeah, she was just kind of like, I'm done with you.
Yeah. I mean... It's crazy, right? Like, it would take a little bit more research into, like, how the political angle of that would have worked. Like, how would Cormac have reached out as a defector of the crown, basically, right? Being like, see you later. I was shunned from where I used to be because I slept with the maid. Now I'm living in the new world. And by the way, I want my daughter back, who's now under the British.
I think he had quite a bit of influence. I don't think anyone would have held an affair from over 20 years ago against him in the New World. I feel like
I guess, but it's just like, he was...
That's kind of irrelevant. It's not like he's in Ireland anymore.
No, but he was wealthy and had influence, but he was just a plantation owner. It's not like he was...
But he was probably well connected in politics, is what I would assume.
Well, yeah, definitely would have had to have been. Yeah. To have gotten a pirate daughter out of jail.
When she's supposed to be hung.
Yeah, that's going to take some strings being pulled.
But there's no record of her ever being executed.
Right.
So
I like to think that she made it back, obviously.
I feel like that's a much more satisfying narrative where she had her rebellious youth. She got it out of her system, and then she ended up marrying and living a quiet life in Charleston, raising 8 kids.
After, like, murdering and pillaging and... Right? Because that's something, I mean, we didn't give too many, like, details because there aren't that many. But by all accounts... These women...
They were active.
And being more doing it for fun, married more out of necessity. Like, they were ruthless. Yeah. Slitting throats, doing all they had to do. All the same things that their crew were doing when they were attacking ships.
They would have had to gain a reputation.
Exactly.
To have legitimacy.
And they did gain a reputation.
Yeah.
They gained a reputation of, like, stabbing their victims more times than necessary in space, like, in the stomach and in areas where they knew it wouldn't kill them right away. Mm-hmm. Like, they knew how to inflict pain. Mm-hmm. Learnt probably from Calico and other pirates, right?
Or just learnt from doing it.
It just takes practice. So
these are just two incredibly... they're so fascinating. Both of these stories, they come from very disparate worlds, I would say.
Yeah.
But they come to a culmination. Basically, their lives... Yeah, like the climax of their lives were together. And then obviously, we get Mary Read dying, unfortunately. Yeah. And then Bonny disappearing. And it's just, and then you get this account from supposedly Defoe. And it's like, this surfaced 3 years later. And it was, it was published in 1724. And it was an instant hit. Like, boom.
Super
People
successful.
Loved it. There was a 4th edition by 1726. So only 2 years down the road. Yeah. So it was just, it really drew on the fascination for the exotic world, the new world. People in London, that was where the book actually premiered, was in London. Yeah. So in that sense, it kind of actually correlates to one of the other theories. So we've been kind of saying like, it could have been I keep wanting to say Willem Dafoe. It's not Willem Dafoe.
Yeah, not the guy from Spider-Man.
No, not that guy, but Daniel Dafoe.
Right.
And the idea that he might have been involved. But there's also another guy that many scholars have pointed to that could have been the author.
Okay.
And he was actually a publisher. His name was Nathaniel Mist. And...
Sorry, just to be clear, the author of the
general history of
pirates,
which was the main account that talks about Anne, Bonny, and Mary Read.
And Rackham.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is the primary source that all other works have sort of derived from.
Right.
So it's kind of like the bedrock, so to speak.
Absolutely.
So so this guy, Nathaniel Mist, he was, again, like I said, he was a publisher. He was in London at the time. And there was this one scholar named Arn, I don't even know how to pronounce this, Arn Bialuszewski.
Nice.
In the University of Kiel in Germany. And they were the individual that actually put forth this idea that this former sailor, he was a journalist and he was a publisher of this weekly journal is what it was called.
Okay.
Nathaniel Mist, he would have been well qualified. He would have known the ins and outs. So maybe this was a work of fiction, some people have pointed to. Maybe he just had a history, like he just had knowledge of these people because of his past work as a sailor and things like that. Yeah. So it's very vague.
It's detailed though, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's a book that you look at it and it's like, okay, it makes sense when the prose, like the way it's written, it's like, it is very much like, stuff was written that way back then though, right? It was more kind of jazzed up. It's not like an article where he's like, Jack Rackham did this, this, and this. Like, it comes across as more fictional.
A little bit.
But it really. Doesn't necessarily, but not really though. Like not to the same extent as other.
As an account.
As an account.
Yeah.
For the most part, right? But obviously there's intimate like things on like dialogue, like conversations and things like, obviously those are embellished. True, they have to be embellished. Because this guy, unless this is like a triple alias where this is actually like a member of the crew. That is posing as this fake Charles Johnson captain who's a fan of Daniel Defoe and basically wrote in his prose to make it seem as if it was him.
That's actually that's
because the thing is when you look at the style of writing and what he talks about, it does kind of, like you said, it indicates somebody who knows what they're talking about, somebody who had spent time on a ship, and by all accounts, Defoe didn't.
No, yeah, he didn't.
He was a merchant. You know, he was a writer. He spent his time on land. He was not a sailor, by all accounts. So, that's my theory for that.
It's just, it's so funny. Because, again, like, some people will say, like, oh, this is a work of fiction. Oh, this author, there's no record of existence of this dude. Therefore, this is a pen name by someone who just, was fancifully writing a fictional account of whatever, even though there is documents that support the existence of all of these people, including Bonny and Read.
Right.
So things like a proclamation from Governor Woodes Rogers, so it was issued out in September 5th, 1720, and it actually appeared in the Boston Gazette just a week later, and it actually detailed the actions of Rackham's crew, all of their exploits, and a description of two women by the name of Anne Fulford, alias Bonny, and Mary Read.
Wow, look at that, eh?
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
And then, there was also another mention of them, the Rackham's crew, that forced, I don't know, I think this was a newspaper article or something, or just like another issued statement, a proclamation of sorts.
Right.
That essentially Rogers had ordered a sloop of 40, with a crew of 45 after the 12 men and 2 women aboard the Revenge. Mm-hmm. So that again points to, the number, the crew of 45. Like, that's a lot of people to send out. Like, you're making sure those people are either captured or killed and brought back. Like,
you didn't want any slip-ups on that one, for sure.
No. Yeah, it's just so fascinating, though. Like, I this book, like, I want to read the whole thing through. Like, we just read what was necessary for this episode and what was relevant.
Yeah.
But, again, like, I would highly recommend it. It is on Gutenberg?
Gutenberg. Project Gutenberg.
I say Glutenberg because I'm a celiac and I love Glutenberg beer.
If you, sponsor us, Glutenberg, please.
Glutenberg. Canadian sponsor.
Yeah, no, it's available in PDF if you just Google it, but we will have it included in our sources as well, so you can check out the website, and it'll be up on Into the Portal.
Definitely was a very influential piece of work at the time, and still remains that way as a historical document.
Well, no other documents have surfaced that match it, right?
Well, that's just it too. Yeah, no other amount of detail and the amount. Yeah, exactly. Just the history it gives us, and it's so funny because David Cordingley, the guy that wrote that Seafaring Women book that I mentioned earlier, he actually wrote. He said, "This is a quote: It has been said, and there seems to be no reason to question this, that Captain Johnson created the modern conception of pirates." End quote. So whether this was actually a Captain Johnson or a pen name for someone else, he was very influential. Yeah,
in the perception of pirates and just the whole... This guy, it's because of this guy that Johnny Depp got that role. No, really though, it's because of this guy that the stories kind of evolved into that, right? The Pirates of the Caribbean, and because stories of pirates became infamous moving into the 1800s too, right? Yeah, it was basically because of this book. It's really cool.
Really, really cool. This whole story is just like,
So anyway, to wrap up the story portion, I guess I sort of gave my theory on just like their ending. The fate. Yeah, I mean...
Well, we both kind of did, yeah.
I mean...
It's very open-ended, though. If anyone has any... additional information that we didn't include in this episode, please reach out to us.
Yeah.
But we would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Absolutely.
Because it's again, like, I feel like I'm gushing right now. I'm just like, these women, oh my goodness, like, they're just way before their time, really.
Yeah.
And, like, it just makes me wonder how many other stories of women like this are around that just haven't been told.
Yeah, just the record's lost or just not, whatever. I mean, it's tough. It's
not
like
they have to be a pirate or anything, but just, like, these strong female, I don't want to call them archetypes because they were real people.
Yeah.
But they really... honestly are archetypes now, looking back from a historical standpoint.
Absolutely.
And just very inspirational. So we hope you enjoyed this episode.
Yeah.
It was really fun for us to research and put together for you. And again,
totally.
we're obviously gonna do another
more pirates. More pirates coming at you for sure.
Because we love pirates.
More history and more pirates.
More legends.
Pirates.
The pirates. Yeah. Yes, indeed. Arg. We haven't done that yet. We need to get an arg in there.
Yeah, there you go. That's our one arg for the episode. So before we wrap it up, we had some shout-outs. Amber, you wanted to...
Okay, yeah. You guys might have noticed something different about the beginning of our show tonight.
Yes.
And so, we did it. Yeah. We decided to launch a Patreon page for all of you. And we really just want to create a really cool community where everyone can come and be a part of it and get really neat rewards and bonuses and just all sorts of fun stuff.
Definitely. Like, we
have
love
your
doing
say,
this.
like,
Yeah, exactly. Like, to be a part of it. And we love doing this. We wish that we could just do it full time. That's really tough, obviously. And we know that's going to take a while to be able to do that. But that's why we launched Patreon, just to get more interaction with you guys. We've had such great support and feedback that we decided to create bonus mini episodes, bonus full-length episodes. Yeah. We have writing projects that are going to be available for different levels of patrons and
stickers.
Just all kinds of really cool stuff. And
what else? Oh my gosh, there's we want to do the crossfire too.
Yeah, so
that would be like where you guys, if you're at that tier of support, then you can actually submit your own topics that we'll get into and debate and do all sorts of fun stuff.
And it'll be like a live stream, like a video stream, and then we will that'll be like up on our YouTube, our Crossfire. So so there's that, but then like mini episodes at like the $5 Patreon contribution level, and like sticker and shout outs and a handwritten thank you note from us and all kinds of different stuff.
Gotta have that personal touch, right?
Yeah, we love you guys, and we love doing the show, and we just really appreciate it. And if you like the show too, and you're willing to support, you want to support us, we would love to have you along for the ride. Yeah, so you can visit that page at patreon.com/into the portal.
Yeah, and Patreon, that's just spelled PATREON. PR what?
PATREON.
Yeah, exactly.
Patreon.com/into the portal. So go check that out, and let us know what you think.
And we just want to give a shout out to Matthew Cronkite. Woo! Thanks for pledging your support. Cheers, man.
Yeah, man, we really appreciate it, and we hope that many more of you join the dive
into the portal.
Yeah, our journey into the bazaar.
Exactly. So until next week, Yeah,
thanks again for listening, and we will be back again next Sunday.
Until then.
was a podcast from the Podfix Network. You can check out more shows like it at podfixnetwork.com.